whispers in the walls. The Johnson family had been dreaming of a fresh start. After years of renting small apartments in the city, they finally found what seemed to be the perfect home. A charming Victorian-style house nestled in the quiet suburbs of New England. The price had been shockingly affordable, and while the realtor vaguely mentioned the house's unique history, they didn't ask too many questions. It was beautiful, spacious, and theirs. The moving truck rumbled away as Ethan and Lisa Johnson stood on the front porch with their two kids, Sarah, 12, and Max, 8. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of leaves and the promise of new beginnings. "This is it," Ethan said, smiling at his wife. "Our new life starts here." Inside, the house was as enchanting as it had been during their walkthrough. The hardwood floors gleamed in the fading sunlight, and the intricate molding along the walls gave the place a timeless charm. But as they unpacked and settled in, a subtle, almost imperceptible chill hung in the air. By the third night, things started to feel off. It began with small, almost laughable incidents. Doors that were left open would suddenly be closed. The lights flickered in the upstairs hallway no matter how many times Ethan replaced the bulbs. Max complained about hearing faint whispers at night, but Lisa brushed it off as the usual anxiety of adjusting to a new home. Then Sarah found the mirror. It was hidden behind an old wardrobe in the attic, a dusty, ornate piece with a tarnished silver frame. She had been exploring while her parents organized the kitchen. The moment Sarah's fingers brushed the mirror, she felt a strange vibration crawl up her arm, like static electricity. "Mom, Dad, look what I found," she called, dragging the mirror downstairs. Lisa frowned when she saw it. "That thing looks ancient, probably worth something." "I don't know," Ethan muttered, eyeing the intricate carvings along the frame. "It gives me the creeps. Maybe we should leave it up there." But Sarah insisted on keeping it in her room. That night, she woke to the sound of tapping. At first, Sarah thought it was a tree branch scraping against the window. But when she looked, the trees outside were still. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. It was coming from the mirror. Her heart pounded as she stared at her reflection. In the dim moonlight, her face looked pale, almost ghostly. But there was something else. A shadowy figure, faint but undeniable, standing just behind her. Sarah screamed. Ethan and Lisa rushed into her room, finding their daughter trembling in her bed. "There's someone in the mirror," she cried. Ethan examined the mirror, tapping on the glass and looking behind it. "It's just an old mirror, sweetheart. Probably your imagination." But Sarah knew what she had seen. Over the next few days, the house seemed to come alive with strange occurrences. Max's toys would move on their own, rolling across the floor when no one was near them. Sarah's mirror grew colder to the touch, and her reflection sometimes lingered for a split second after she moved away. Lisa began waking up at 3 a.m. every night, feeling as though someone was standing at the foot of their bed. One evening, while unpacking boxes in the basement, Ethan found an old photograph tucked inside the wall. It showed a family from the early 1900s, 2 parents and 2 children standing in front of the same house. Their faces were solemn, their eyes hollow. Scribbled on the back were the words, "We never left." Ethan's stomach turned. He decided not to show Lisa. By the second week, the whispers grew louder. Max refused to sleep in his room, claiming that a woman with long, dark hair kept staring at him from the corner. Sarah's grades started slipping, and she became withdrawn, spending hours staring into her mirror as if entranced. Lisa couldn't ignore it anymore. She began researching the house's history and discovered a chilling story. In the 1920s, a woman named Margaret Harrow had lived there with her husband and 2 children. Margaret was rumored to be mentally unstable. One fateful night, she murdered her entire family before hanging herself in the attic. "Ethan," Lisa whispered, clutching her laptop, "we have to leave." But it was too late. That night, the house erupted with activity. Doors slammed shut on their own. Shadowy figures darted through the halls. The air grew icy, and an overwhelming sense of dread seeped into every corner. Lisa found Sarah standing in front of her mirror, tears streaming down her face. The reflection wasn't her own. It was Margaret Harrow, her hollow eyes filled with malice. "Sarah, step away!" Lisa screamed, pulling her daughter back. The mirror shattered, and with it came a deafening wail that echoed through the house. Ethan burst into the room, holding Max. "We're leaving now." As they fled the house, they could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching them. The Johnsons never returned to the house. They sold it at a loss and moved back to the city. But even in their new apartment, Sarah sometimes woke up to faint whispers, and Lisa swore she saw shadows move out of the corner of her eye. Margaret Harrow's presence had marked them, and no matter where they went, they would never truly escape. Some houses aren't meant to be homes. Weeks turned into months, but the Johnson family couldn't shake the darkness that had followed them from the house. Sarah's once vibrant personality had dulled. She spent hours drawing strange, chaotic images, dark silhouettes, jagged shapes, and a recurring figure of a woman with hollow eyes. Lisa, though outwardly strong, was plagued by relentless nightmares. Each dream took her back to that house, to the attic, where Margaret Harrow's twisted figure loomed, whispering incoherent threats. Ethan threw himself into work, desperately trying to distract himself, but even in the sterile environment of his office, he sometimes felt a cold hand on his shoulder, only to turn and find no one there. Max, however, seemed the most affected. He stopped talking altogether. One night, Lisa found him sitting on his bed, staring at the wall. When she asked what he was doing, he whispered, "She's here. She says we belong to her now." Desperate for answers, Lisa began reaching out to paranormal investigators and mediums. Most dismissed her as a hysterical mother, but one name kept coming up: Eleanor Grayson, a renowned psychic who had helped families in similar situations. Eleanor arrived at their apartment one rainy evening. She was an older woman with sharp, discerning eyes and an air of quiet authority. The moment she stepped through the door, her face darkened. "This is worse than I thought," she murmured. Eleanor explained that the spirit of Margaret Harrow had attached itself to the family, feeding on their fear and slowly breaking them down. "She's not bound to that house anymore," Eleanor said. "She's found new vessels to torment." Eleanor suggested a cleansing ritual, but warned it would be dangerous. "Margaret's spirit is strong. She won't let go without a fight." That night, Eleanor began the ritual in the living room. She lit candles, burned sage, and drew protective symbols on the walls. The air grew heavy, and the temperature dropped sharply. As Eleanor chanted, the lights flickered violently. The shadows in the room began to twist and shift, forming grotesque shapes. Suddenly, Max let out a blood-curdling scream. "She's here!" he cried, pointing to the corner of the room. Everyone turned to see the figure of Margaret Harrow, her gaunt face contorted with rage, her hollow eyes burning with hatred. "You think you can banish me?" Her voice echoed, a guttural, otherworldly sound. "They're mine now. They've always been mine." Eleanor stood her ground, continuing to chant as the spirit advanced. The candles flickered wildly, their flames nearly extinguished by the growing wind in the room. "Lisa, Ethan, you must hold your children," Eleanor shouted. "Do not let them go, no matter what happens." Margaret lunged toward Sarah, but Lisa pulled her daughter close, screaming in defiance. Max clung to Ethan, tears streaming down his face as the spirit's dark energy surged through the room. Eleanor's voice grew louder, her chants more forceful. The protective symbols on the walls began to glow, emitting a warm, golden light. Margaret shrieked in pain, her form flickering like a dying flame. "You don't belong here, Margaret," Eleanor shouted. "Your time is over. Go back to the darkness where you came from." With one final, piercing scream, Margaret's form disintegrated into a cloud of black smoke. The room fell silent. Eleanor collapsed into a chair, visibly drained. "It's done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the scars may linger. You must remain vigilant." The weeks following the ritual were eerily quiet. Sarah's nightmares stopped, and Max began speaking again. The family started to heal, but the experience had left them forever changed. One evening, Lisa found Sarah packing away the drawings she had made during their ordeal. As she flipped through the sketches, one caught her eye, a detailed drawing of their old house. In the attic window, Margaret's shadowy figure stared back at her, a faint, mocking smile on her lips. Lisa shuddered but said nothing. She placed the drawings in a box and taped it shut, hoping to bury the memories along with them. But late at night, when the house was silent, she sometimes thought she heard faint whispers in the walls, a chilling reminder that some spirits never truly rest. Story 2. The room that wasn't there. The Millers had been looking for the perfect place to settle down. When they stumbled upon an old colonial-style house in rural Pennsylvania, it seemed like a dream come true. The house was massive, with 6 bedrooms, a sprawling yard, and a price tag far below what they'd expected. "I can't believe it's ours," Jenny Miller said, standing in the foyer with her husband, Mark, and their son Tommy. "It's like something out of a storybook." The realtor had been evasive when they asked why the house had been on the market for so long, brushing it off as bad timing. The Millers didn't press further. The first week in the house was uneventful, save for the usual chaos of unpacking. But on their 8th day, something strange happened. It began with a discovery. Tommy, a curious 10-year-old, had been exploring the 2nd floor when he noticed a draft coming from one of the hallways. He followed it to the end of the corridor, where the wallpaper seemed slightly warped, as if it had been hastily applied. "Dad! Mom! Come look at this!" Mark and Jenny hurried upstairs to find Tommy tugging at the corner of the wallpaper. Beneath it was the faint outline of a door. "That's odd," Mark muttered. "There's no mention of another room on the blueprints." After some effort, Mark managed to pry the door open. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading up to what appeared to be an attic room. Dust and cobwebs clung to every surface, but the room itself was furnished. A small bed, a wooden chair, and a cracked vanity mirror. The strangest part? The room didn't feel abandoned. It felt occupied. That night, Tommy woke up to the sound of humming. It was soft and melodic, like a lullaby, and it seemed to be coming from upstairs. "Mom?" he called out, but there was no answer. The humming grew louder, more insistent. Unable to resist, Tommy climbed out of bed and crept toward the hidden staircase. When he reached the top, the humming stopped. The room was dark except for a faint glow emanating from the cracked mirror. "Hello," Tommy whispered. For a moment there was silence. Then a voice, faint and childlike, replied, "Play with me." Tommy screamed and ran back to his parents' room. The next morning, Mark and Jenny dismissed Tommy's story as a bad dream, but he refused to go near the hidden room again. Later that day, while Jenny was cleaning, she found an old photograph tucked inside the vanity in the hidden room. It showed a young girl in a white dress, sitting on the very same bed. Her eyes were dark, almost too dark, and her expression was void of any emotion. On the back of the photo, someone had scrawled, "Anna, 1923. When Mark got home, Jenny showed him the photo. "Do you think this was her room?" Mark shrugged. "Maybe, but why would someone seal it off?" That night, they got their answer. At 3:14 a.m., Jenny woke to the sound of footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving down the hall outside their bedroom. "Mark," she whispered, shaking him awake. The footsteps stopped. Mark grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, but the hallway was empty. As he turned to go back inside, a cold gust of air rushed past him, and the flashlight flickered. "Daddy!" The voice came from the hidden staircase. It was faint, almost a whisper, but it sent a chill down his spine. When Mark turned, he saw her. A little girl in a white dress stood at the top of the stairs, her dark eyes fixed on him. Her mouth moved as if she were speaking, but no sound came out. Jenny screamed as the girl disappeared, leaving behind a faint giggle. The next morning, Jenny dove into research about the house. She found an old newspaper article about the previous owners, a family who had lived there in the 1920s. Their daughter, Anna, had fallen to her death from the attic window. The article claimed it was an accident, but neighbors had suspected something darker. Whispers of abuse and neglect had followed the family for years. After Anna's death, the parents mysteriously disappeared, and the house remained vacant for decades. "She's still here," Jenny said, trembling. "She's trying to tell us something." That night, the Millers decided to confront the spirit. Mark set up a camera in the hidden room while Jenny stayed downstairs with Tommy. As Mark stepped into the room, the temperature plummeted. His breath fogged in the air, and the faint sound of humming returned. "Anna," he said, his voice steady. "If you're here, show yourself." The mirror began to glow, and a figure materialized in its cracked surface. It was Anna, her dark eyes filled with sorrow. "They hurt me," she whispered, her voice echoing in the room. "Make them go away." Before Mark could respond, the door slammed shut, trapping him inside. Downstairs, Jenny and Tommy heard the commotion and ran upstairs, but the hidden door wouldn't budge. "Mark!" Jenny screamed, pounding on the door. Inside, Mark was struggling to breathe. The room was filled with a suffocating darkness, and Anna's figure loomed closer. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice growing more desperate. Mark reached for the camera, shouting, "We'll help you. Just let us go." The darkness lifted, and the door flew open. Jenny pulled Mark out, and the three of them fled the house that night, leaving everything behind. Months later, the house was demolished, and a small park was built in its place. But even now, locals claim to hear faint humming at night, and children sometimes report seeing a little girl in white, standing beneath the trees. Some spirits, it seems, are bound not to walls but to the pain that lingers long after they're gone.